As I said earlier, it's an honor to be with you today. Actually, Jim, my name is Theogene Anthony Mills. I was 10 or 11 years old before I realized that. I did the Theogene Anthony Gene Mills too because it was rather complicated. And I'm the third, and I swore I would not name my son anything nearly that complicated, but when he got here, I couldn't help it. And he did the same thing, so there are a number of us that are still around. Greetings, it's an honor to be with you today, and I'm pleased to be able to bring to you some of the issues that are before not only Louisiana, but Louisiana Family Forum in 2020. I want to first of all commend you because you serve an important role in this state, and particularly in the arena that I work in. And I believe we have a common objective, and that is a commitment to speak truth, not just about power, but to power. And I think that's essential. It's essential in the preservation of the essential liberties that we enjoy. Not everybody enjoys those. We're privileged to live in this great state and in a great nation that I believe is unlike anywhere else in the world. And our lifestyles and some of the subject matter that we get to deal with is so much different than what many people around the world are dealing with right now. And I think it's imperative that for our children and our children's children, we preserve those liberties. And so your role is essential in that preservation effort, and I commend you for your service to the public. I celebrate your successes and your desire to fulfill a noble mission. I believe it's important. I thought I might begin talking about three quarterbacks: Breeze, Burrow, and Bel Edwards. Two number 9s, and as I understand it, number 11 for Amite High. Obviously, Breeze, disappointingly, has to suspend for one more year that possibility of a second Super Bowl. In spite of the statistics, in spite of a marvelous year, in spite of probably the best talent that we've ever seen at a New Orleans Saints franchise level. And it was very difficult to watch. It was very difficult to experience, and I'm sure that many are mourning a very honorable man and a very incredible team's very disappointing loss yesterday. Burrow and LSU's celebration starts next Monday night, and I predict it will be, as anticipated, a rather spectacular spanking of the Clemson Tigers. And Burrow's equally incredible. Number 9 for the Louisiana Tigers is a formidable player, probably one of the finest athletes that we've ever seen in the Deep South and at LSU, and his numbers and bona fides demonstrate that. If I had to make a prediction, and I'm not a betting man, I'd be willing to bet that we're going to see a 48-17 rout of the Clemson Tigers, and I hopefully that we can celebrate that next Monday night. Bel Edwards, not to be confused with Clyde Edwards, will learn his situation on the very same day. And unlike number 9s, number 11 won't have the benefit of champion receivers looking for open field. He'll likely have some linebackers of the opposing party who are trying to limit his advancement of an agenda, at least legislatively. The prospect for Senate President, at least the favored prospect for Senate President, is Paige Cortez. I spoke to Paige earlier this week, and he still assures me that he's got the numbers. He's moving in a direction. He's found the team that he needed and is in the process of securing that vote. He's got a lifetime rating with the Louisiana Family Forum of 85%, so we have a working relationship, open communication. He represents the Acadiana area, and he's done so in a very formidable fashion. And his counterpart in the House, the heir apparent to the gavel as the Speaker of the House, in spite of a lot of the conversation, is still Sherman Mack. I saw an article in the paper this morning, thought it was well written. Mack's got a lifetime score of 95% with the Louisiana Family Forum. There's another player that's a significant player, Clay Shakeschneider. I count all of these amongst my friends. And Clay's got a lifetime record with the Louisiana Family Forum of 75%. He's leading a group of a dozen or so holdouts from the Republican Party. Clay says that we need an independent House. But there's some conversation as to whether or not he might be hiring an outside consultant to make that independence a little less focused on the inside chamber and more on outside influences. At least that's what the criticisms are. Excuse me. I predict that Mac will have the votes. I believe he's already got the votes. I believe the vote will come down unless something substantial changes between now and next Monday. He'll continue to accrue additional support. I predict that John Bel Edwards, like Bill Clinton when he faced a similar situation, will be required to move to the center or center-right and find common ground that they can both work on together. We happen to believe there's a lot of common territory that could be worked on. Infrastructure is one, roadways, bridges, drainage. I live on the Mississippi River and the corridor, and I got to tell you that the drainage plan in my region of the state needs to be updated. I don't think it's been visited in over 20 to 25 years. It's somewhat outdated, and it's escaped some of the detrimental flooding that other places have, but it constantly remains wet, and we're remaining with a river situation that continues to threaten not only our levees and their inherent structure, but our major metropolitan areas. I don't know if you realize this, but that river stayed up for over 230, 240 days last year. It's risen and fallen another 5 or 6 times. I walk that levee every day. I walk my dog or runner on that levee every single day. I watched the deer yesterday morning walking down the front yard and the wood ducks as they landed. It's a beautiful region, great place to raise a family, a wonderful place to live, except for the bear of the mighty Mississippi River. And it's a force to be reckoned with, and one that I fear we will not always be able to tame. Now, the Corps has been successful in rolling the dice for decades now, but they hadn't been absolutely successful because we lost levees in different states all up and down this corridor, and we still drained 70+% of northern America right through our front yard. There are plenty of areas that under this current political scenario we can still agree to work together on. I suspect that the dozen or so holdout Republicans, and I don't know this because I'm not into the inside political partisan politics. I believe that principles need to prevail and can rule the day, and best ideas can come from any number of sources, and we ought to be open to communication and, when possible, to agreeable solutions that work for everybody and for much of our population. There are some issues that are non-negotiable, and on those issues I understand and respect where a person stands, and I equally expect that others will respect where we stand on those issues. The issue of life is one of those. It's the cornerstone of all fundamental issues, and if you don't have a right to life, what issue really is important enough? What other issue follows if someone has the right to take your life? And that's the reason that we work so aggressively on the pro-life issue. The high stakes of the leadership contest, interesting, will be decided how Louisiana does reapportionment and redistricting, and I'm sure that's the reason there's so much energy and earnest behind the ongoing battle. In other matters before the Louisiana Family Forum, and I'll be glad to field any questions I can on any number of these questions or other ones that you may have. Last Monday, the Louisiana Family Forum filed an amicus brief to the U.S. Supreme Court in the June Medical versus Gee. And I just saw a report that Dr. Gee resigned, and Governor Edwards has released or accepted her resignation for other work. So there may be more to that story, and I don't know if it's related to this or if there are other opportunities, but that was breaking news. Even I was reading that as we were having lunch. The media in Louisiana, they say, is sometimes slow to get the news out. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if it's expected to be heard on March 4th. Our brief is available for your review at louisianafamilyforum.org. Louisiana Family Forum primarily makes the case in that brief that every human life is valuable and deserves to be protected. Louisiana Act 620 by Katrina Jackson, another good friend, a Democrat from Monroe, Louisiana, who passed in 2014, seeks protection of the lives of the mothers seeking medical care. Every woman, even those who seek an abortion, deserve the right to competent and quality care. Act 629 has been upheld by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. It's now being appealed at the U.S. Supreme Court. It requires ambulatory surgical centers, not just abortion clinics, but all of them, to have admitting privileges at hospitals within 30-mile radius of the facility that's conducting or hosting the abortion, to ensure that both docs are competent and will provide a continuity of care for the women who find themselves in that circumstance. Unsurprisingly, abortionists seek special exemptions from the standard of medical procedure and safety that currently applies to all Louisiana doctors and ambulatory surgical centers around Louisiana. We believe Louisiana women deserve better. We'll be there to support. I'll be there in D.C. To witness the proceedings and to assist in any way possible the Attorney General in his defense of Louisiana's case. On to somewhat lighter note, in February we will once again recognize Louisiana's longest known married couple. We do that every year to highlight the importance and benefits not only to society but to individual family units of the longest known married couple in the state of Louisiana. We've been doing that for some 15 or 20 years. Last year's recipients, the reigning champions, are Wallace and Gladys Menard from Dusson, Louisiana. They've been married for 81 years now. He's 198. Last time I was there in his living room, he invited me to come back when he could prepare a gumbo because he was excited, and he wanted to tell me the rest of the story of the wonder of his family. I asked him why he married his wife. He told me rather candidly, she had 40 acres and a mule, and she looked pretty good in a bikini. Now, I'm pretty sure there was no bikinis back then, so I think that was a pejorative, or that was his way of trying to make light, but we look forward to hosting them. Hopefully we can do that at the mansion this year. For years we did that. That has been because of our previous recipients and because of their ability to travel, something we've had to hit pause on. We'll try to do it again in Baton Rouge, and hopefully you'll be able to participate in that as we have in the past. Finally, Louisiana Family Forum will embark on a statewide series of town hall meetings to introduce both our 2020 legislative agenda and begin a conservative conversation with opinion leaders on the subject matter of a federal family paid leave policy. Ironically, U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy has introduced his own version of support for working families, I believe is what he called it. Ivanka Trump came out after we had agreed to host this conversation. We felt like it was good common ground that we could find our niche and have a conversation with conservatives around the state about those who fall below the federal mandates or who are employed with circumstances with no paid family medical leave policy, and have a conversation about what it would take to have both sides of the aisle come together to create a conservative or a principled version of paid family leave. Cassidy's bill and the merits of that bill will be discussed and unpacked and critiqued. You can also find that at our website. Our first town hall meeting will begin this Thursday, January 9th at Lake Charles at the existing or a special edition of the Profit and Loss Group. It's a group of businessmen and Christian leaders who gather monthly in the Lake Charles region. Senator Cassidy's been invited and has agreed that he'd like to participate in as many of these as possible, but because of impeachment proceedings, may be detained in the month of January, so he may have to Skype in or provide us with a video. We will also host a January 21st meeting, and former U.S. Senator Rick Santorum will join us in Lafayette. He has also picked up on this idea of paid family leave and finding a bipartisan place where both Democrats and Republicans can agree on not creating a new entitlement program, but creating opportunities for those who have no coverage. And that's the niche that we're trying to identify as well. And we'll also conclude another meeting, and there'll be a series of meetings throughout the state. Not all of those have been pinpointed or highlighted. There'll be a final meeting on March 10th after the Governor's Prayer Breakfast at the Welcome Center, where we invite our annual pastors gathering to discuss our legislative agenda and this issue as well. And we'll continue to unpack that and provide details to you as they're made available. I'm glad to answer any questions either about our agenda, any of the things that I've talked about, or anything that you may have on your mind. Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk a little bit about what the Family Forum's agenda for 2020 is going to be with the legislature, or what the priorities will be?
It's very difficult to do right now because we're still waiting to see. Boy, it is hot in here. I don't know if anybody. Yeah, I'm sorry. The question was, what will the Louisiana Family Forum's legislative agenda include in 2020? Is that correct? It's very difficult to know right now with a Democrat governor, a Republican House and Senate leadership. A lot of times ideas that may be important or what some would consider an aggressive traditional move forward may run afoul of the governor's veto pen, and we're still trying to assess what we can accomplish. It really comes down to the leadership and where number 11 lands on how we work together with the Speaker of the House and the Senate President. We have our obligatory battles that we will be there to speak on traditional family, against sex surveys in the schools. I think I've told you this last time I was here. There's no appropriate way to introduce inappropriate sexual material to a child. We'll always fight that. We'll continue to fight for the right for all human life from the earliest moments of conception until natural death. And so we have our obligatory battles. We will review all the bills. We'll do a cursory reading of some 1,200 to 1,600 bills. We'll evaluate them on whether or not they expand government, require additional taxes, fall within the realm of traditional values, and then assert a position that the Family Forum will provide to the Louisiana Legislature, many of whom are brand new, some of whom we've never met, many of whom we hope to meet in these town hall meetings around the state. It's our opportunity to gather opinion leaders, pastors, policymakers, to thank the ones who have done well and are on their way out, and to welcome the ones who are brand new and on their way in, and to talk about how we can strike a conversation and assist them in the decisions that are before them. And that's about as close as I can come right now. That may change in the next 30 or 45 days. I hope it'll become to solidify shortly. And as it does, I'll let you know. Yes, sir?
I'm confused about the family leave. What is conservative paid family leave look like? Are you backing Cassidy's proposal, or is there something else? Is there?
It's an excellent question. The question is, what does conservative paid family leave look like, and are we backing Cassidy's bill? Fair enough? I don't know yet. That's why we're hosting a conversation on what the principles of that might consist of. I believe it's probably not a new entitlement. One of the bills that has been filed would create a new entitlement. It requires a funding stream from Social Security. Cassidy's, as I understand, and I think has merit, is against a future tax credit or an existing tax credit amortized over a 10 or 15-year period. So if a child tax credit is allowed up to $2,000, I believe Trump raised it from a $1,000 threshold to $2,000, it would allow it to draw down at $500 a year until that paid family leave is offset against future tax credits, which has merit. But we're going to host that conversation amongst these opinion leaders to determine what they believe a conservative version of paid family leave looks like and how we might accomplish that. There was a second part to that question. Will you refresh me on that?
Well, that was
okay.
Whether you're supporting Cassidy.
Well, you know, we're still critiquing Cassidy's bill. There's some parts of it that we really like. There's some parts that are brand new, and there are parts that we're trying to get our minds around in terms of understanding it. It's developing. It's been filed. There's no number or bill attached to it. And as I understand it, Ivanka Trump and one other lawmaker has submitted a similar proposal. So this is new territory for us. It's one of the reasons we're hosting the conversation. It's like criminal justice reform. I did not step into that arena as a subject matter expert, but rather one who was concerned about some of the things that were transpiring and what we could do to make it better. And we attempted to do that. And if you recall, we did it below the threshold of nonviolent, non-dangerous, standardization of sentencing, standardization of good time served. And there were a lot of principles that everybody could agree to. And I asked the DAs who at one point said, we're out of here. We don't like what you've put up. And I talked to the board, the panel that I was asked to serve on by the governor, who said we would like to go much farther than some on this panel are willing to go. And we kept the conversation around the common ground that we agreed to. And with the Sheriff's Association, with the DAs, and with conservative members of the legislature, I believe we did make some positive change. Now, some of that's been criticized, and we promised to revisit it along the way. And if adjustments needed to be made, we'd come back to the table and make those adjustments. But as I understand it, close to $11 million have been reinvested in the specialty courts, particularly the reentry court or the drug court and Angola's reentry court, which I think is one of the best good news, untold stories in the state of Louisiana. Scott Schlegel, my good friend, is the judge who ran for state Supreme Court justice recently. He serves and is the founder of that particular reentry program, is a subject matter expert, and I think one of the brightest lights in the state of Louisiana on criminal justice reform. And I commend him to your attention. Yes, sir.
What role will the Family Forum play in redistricting, and what you envision the outcome should be?
The question is, what role will Family Forum play in redistricting, and what do I envision the outcome will be? Man, if I knew that, I think it might be easier to answer what the lottery is going to look like. That's going to be an interesting battle. I don't see us playing a central role inside the partisan politics, and that is one of the most political enterprises that is undertaken in partisan politics. Who gets to decide where the lines are? I think what we got to do is continue to keep light on all the players, continue to keep the conversation, and continue to celebrate the fact that you don't have to break somebody's knees or beat somebody over the head in order to have a disagreement or a civil dialogue. I don't know that we'll go much further than that. Time will tell, and necessity will determine or dictate whether we go any further.
Would you be willing to support like an independent commission, like a nonpartisan commission to redistricting?
The question is, will we be willing to support an independent commission? Look, I'm part of a number of state networks. The Family Policy Network, which is made up of evangelical organizations like ours around the country. There's some 41 of those, the Family Policy Councils. I'm also part of the State Policy Network, which is the more libertarian leaning. So we have the Heritage Foundation, we got the Cato Institute, we got the Brookings Institute. Many of them have similar ideas about what we ought to do. They just have a different path to arrive at that conclusion. I've worked with independent organizations from the beginning. It's one of the reasons I'm working on criminal justice and paid family leave is because I'm open to that. I believe we can find common and middle ground. If we think it's beneficial and we think it's economic and feasible to accomplish, we wouldn't be opposed to that. I have no plans to do that. That's like asking Jim Inkster if he's going to run for governor. I'll have to pray about it, I believe is what he told me in the back of the room. Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me a little more about this profit and loss group in Lake Charles you're speaking with?
Yeah, I don't know if it's headed up, it's a group of Christian businessmen and women and pastors who gather monthly currently. It's a noon luncheon that'll be hosted in downtown Lake Charles. The gentleman who is the general manager, I believe he's the general manager, his family owns Navarre Chevrolet. Barrett Navarre is an area pastor and also one of the hosts that is part and parcel to this monthly gathering. And he's asked us to come and join him in the past, and we saw an opportunity to bring the two together. I had hoped to bring, I'm sorry?
The official name of the group?
It's Profit and Loss.
Okay.
Profit and Loss Group. I believe it's Profit and Loss Incorporated.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it P-R-O-P-H-E-T?
I don't think so. If I were one of those, I could tell you what the outcome, I would have told you about the outcome yesterday.
And you are not repeating the question.
It's P-R-O-F-I-T. The question is, how do you spell profit?
In light of the recent editorial in Christianity Today, there's been some discussion about evangelical support for the president, given his, shall we say, compared to most of us, colorful private life, the way he's expressing himself. How do you assess the presidential race? Do you see that as a significant factor in the evangelical community?
You know, the question is, in light of the editorial by the Christianity Today, a periodical that was founded by Billy Graham, and criticizing, I think it was Mark Galli's editorial, criticizing Trump's fitness for office and claiming that he needed to be removed from office. What was the second part of the question? How do I see the evangelical support for Trump going into the 2020 election? You know, November 2020 is an eternity away. In terms of political seasons, we have a long way to go. In terms to the merit of Galli's assertion that Trump is not fit for office, and I believe some of the correct criticism or at least questioning of how can Christians, particularly evangelical Christians, support Donald Trump in his period in office, I think you got to come back to the fundamental question that we started with. And that was, who are our choices? If you're looking for a guy with a white hat and a white horse, I think y'all told him he didn't qualify to serve as president. That'd be Bobby Jindal. I mean, he was the altar boy in the equation. He was the one that would bring a squeaky clean appearance and demeanor. And by the way, when he kicked off his presidential campaign, I opened it in prayer. He was a personal friend of mine, and we may differ on any number of policy matters, but Trump was not my first pick, my second pick, my 10th pick, and Jim, as I've told you in the past, He was the 16 out of 16, and there was only one that he was above, and that was Hillary Rodham Clinton. And it was fundamentally because of this question. And I think it answers the assertion and the perception that somehow this man is not morally fit to be our president. And look, I respect people who feel that way. Pat, I know you feel strongly about that. I respect people's differences over whether they belong in office, should have been elected. I don't respect that Donald J. Trump should be removed because I dislike him. The visceral hatred or visceral dislike of Donald Trump. I will commend to you a National Review article by Evan Silvet, I believe is the name. He wrote this in 2017. I came across it recently, and I believe it answers the questions of dignity, decorum, and protocol. And he asserts that we tried dignity. We had one of the most dignified presidents that you could have, George W. Bush. And he was ridiculed and demeaned, and I'll commend to you his exact words because I think he says it so well. He said, we tried decorum in John McCain, and we tried protocol with Mitt Romney. And he said, you know what we've concluded, and I'm not speaking on his behalf, he's speaking to that question, I believe. And I believe he answers what a lot of people feel but don't know how to put into words. We feel like Abraham Lincoln did during the battles of the war between the states, when he was told that Ulysses S. Grant was unfit to serve as an officer in his army. And Lincoln wrestled with that because he was a principled man. And I know there's a lot of opinions about Abraham Lincoln, but Lincoln had this opinion of his own general. He said, I can't afford to let him go. He's a fighter. And I got to tell you, on everything that Trump has promised with regard to the courts, with regard to judges, with regard to the pro-life issue, with regard to the issues that mattered to that community, they had a choice. They had Donald J. Trump or Hillary Rodham Clinton. They had 55 million abortions and abortion on demand, or 2 failed marriages and a mad Twitter man. And they decided this is easy. And I have a feeling Galley's editorial didn't change too many minds except the moderates. They like the dozen or so that are holdouts in the Sherman Mack question. And they're going to find they either get on the bus or they get left behind. And I believe that that currently is the standard of where it exists. Now, if they can demonstrate high crimes and misdemeanors, then I believe that there may be some new evidence. I haven't seen that new evidence. I've seen some of the best of it. I've seen some of the proceedings. I'd commend to you my good friend Mike Johnson's comments as it relates to the proceedings that he oversaw and his frustrations with some of those things. I don't believe that, and by the way, back to the question, do I wish there were bigger, better dignity, decorum, and protocol? Well, sure. But how about we win the battle first? He went on to cite Patton in some of his statements as it occurred in World War II. And I think he likened it to a battle. And I believe that's how Trump sees these things. It's a battle. And oftentimes, necessarily or unnecessarily so, it's him against everybody. And that's the best answer I can offer. I don't necessarily agree with what he tweets. I cringe just like you do. I would have said it differently. And oftentimes I might have chose something different. But he also signed on to our pro-life brief, June Medical versus Gee. And his Solicitor General has appealed the court to present. And I think that's providential. And I think it's going to be substantial in terms of impact. Yes, sir.
Sort of in that same vein, are there any Democratic candidates that are on in the play right now that you all could get along with or approve?
I'm sure there's one somewhere in there. I haven't seen the front runners, and some of the things they've said border on not just socialism, but radical versions of socialism. Who knows? There may be a new face or a new voice that emerges. I voted for Democrats in the past. Hadn't been to many of them, but I have at a state level at least. Buddy Romer was one of my first votes ever cast. And
what is your take on Dr. Gee's resignation?
this question is, what is my take on Dr. Gee's resignation? I was troubled by her nomination in the beginning because of her role in a national Planned Parenthood board. And I raised concern amongst many of the pro-life community and churches and pastors. And I voiced that concern to the governor, who cordially put together a gathering with me, Dr. Gee, and some of her elite team to answer any questions that we may have. I think she was brought in to expand an area of Louisiana medical services that the governor felt strongly about. I think in terms of what she was asked to do, she's done that successfully, and the governor has said that in his press release today. I can only speculate as to what the next step might be or why she's choosing at this time to do that, and I really don't know. I have no idea. I don't know if she's tired of the battle. I don't know if, honestly, I don't know why people would serve in public service to start with. It's like kind of being in the media. You don't get a lot of respect, and you're not going to make a lot of money doing this. I'm not quite sure why somebody would put themselves through this oftentimes. And I'm sure that she's probably gotten her fill of some of that. I don't know if that's fair, and I don't know anything on the inside, or I can't speak to anything specifically. Yes, ma'am?
This week marks the 10th anniversary since Louisiana had its last execution. Can you talk about the Family Forum's position on the death penalty, and if you think enough has been done by this administration and by the general administration previously to actually implement capital punishment in this state?
To implement?
To execute people. I mean, there's obviously been some issues with the.
So the question is, what is the Family Forum's position on the death penalty? Is it okay to shorten it?
Sure.
And do I think the current administration in D.C. or in
No,
Louisiana?
I mean in Louisiana, have they done enough to actually try and carry out the death penalty?
Have they done enough to attempt to carry out the death penalty? You know, I defer to the DAs on the question of the charges they bring and the judges, the findings they bring, and the court systems to determine how long an appeals process can go on. I think that it's become almost fiscally unsound to believe that you can charge someone with the death penalty and know that you'll never actually execute that death penalty because of the ongoing, decades-long appeals process. So I understand those who come to the conclusion that while I may be for the termination of some human life, and by the way, theologically, there's no question. The Bible says in Genesis that when one man sheds another man's blood, by another shall his blood be shed. I shared this with your brother, and he and I had a difference, and I respect him and his position. And in the New Testament, some say, well, that's the old covenant. That applies to an old civil code, an old Abrahamic code, or an old code that existed in the Old Testament. In Romans chapter 10, which is the new covenant, says that those who serve in government are ministers of God and are ministers of righteousness, and their role, Romans 10, 9 and 10, is to punish evil and reward good. And the institution stays legitimate when it punishes evil. The law is a teacher. It tells the next generation what we value and what we discourage. And when you begin to reward evil, and today we don't even know how to define it. And I think that's the challenge, is that we've lost some of the core foundations that define for the next generation of what's right and wrong, what's light and dark, what's good and what's evil. And I think that's why it's so principally important that we begin to teach our children the things we believe, even the difficult things. I realize I'm not a fan, an advocate, a cheerleader for the death penalty, but I'm not opposed to it. I had a conversation with Sister Helen Prejean in the Capitol one day, and she says, do you really support the death penalty? I said, well, you know, Scripture is my guide. And Scripture says they don't bear the sword in vain. I have a son who's on the police force. He also serves in the infantry. You know, he may be called, and by the way, I wear his dog tags today. I told somebody earlier, this is my Protestant rosary, because it reminds me to pray for the guy who may be in harm's way. And he might have to execute justice, even if it means, and he's had this opportunity on many occasions, he's refrained and detained himself from doing it. He works in the French Quarter, where he says the only real police work can actually take place, and he gets to witness it pretty regularly. And he's made good judgment. He's a good young man. He's a fine character. And he's had to make that decision on the run at times. And he's always deferred and said there's a better force that can answer this question. And in each occasion, it's resulted properly. But I will tell you, I'm not opposed to the death penalty. I am opposed to the manner in which we play with it. I'm opposed to the manner in which we may bring charges that might be lesser charges. And I've told my friends on the DAs, Look, if you know this guy's got a laundry list of criminal activity, but you charge him for something lesser because you can plea down something or get an agreement, I understand the necessity or the prudence of moving in that direction, but don't come back later and criticize us that we're letting bad hombres out because they met the criteria for the charge that you actually brought. Because that's truth in sentencing. And I think if we're going to have a death penalty and it's going to be active and on the books, then we ought to conduct it in a manner that's somewhat time sensitive and reasonable.
Wait, I'm confused though. So are you supportive of abolishing the death penalty?
No, I'm not an advocate of.
Louisiana in this day and time?
No. The question is, am I supportive of abolishing the death penalty? No, I believe the Bible affords us theologically reasonable grounds.
All of the administrative things that you just said, which applies to the Louisiana.
I understand. So the question is, but all the administrative things I just said might be the reason some are deterred. And I believe it's become a deterrent. And I believe it's an unnecessary deterrent. I think there needs to be some common ground, and the appeals need to be limited over a period of time that's more feasible if we're going to maintain it. I'm not advocating its removal.
Would you support changing the method of the death penalty from injection to another form?
That's beyond my pay grade. The question is, when's the last time it occurred? I think Melissa answered that question 10 years ago. That's not even a relevant question. But whatever's most prudent at the time.
But that's sort of the question, though, is if it hasn't happened in 10 years, and if there are obviously issues about the method that is the legal method for carrying it out, and whether the state has been able to actually use that method. And so I guess one of the things I was asking you about that before is, do you think that there should be ways that there should be some sort of change to the process in order to actually use capital punishment in a way that we seem unable to do so now?
The question is, should there be ways in which we can use capital punishment differently than we do now? Sure. I don't know what those answers are, but I would support it. I'm not opposed to the death penalty. I don't believe God views death quite like we do. I believe it's designed to get our attention. There's a termination date for everybody in this room. One day he's going to come back, and one day you're going to be called home. And we don't need to be scandalized by that fact. And there are some bad hombres out there, and there are some good ones. And there may be the necessity for those who wear the badge or carry the arms and military arms to make difficult decisions, and sometimes our justice system may be called upon to do that too. And when Burl Cain did that, he always did it sympathetically and with great empathy and great concern to their eternal reward. And I would always be supportive of that. Yes, sir.
Do you see any basis for further tweaking of the criminal justice package and going forward? The governor suggested, when I asked him that it probably wouldn't be anything major, but that he would assess it if something came up.
Yeah, the question is, are there any tweaks to the criminal justice procedure? I think there's probably going to be tweaks that are done for the next 10 years. I think a lot of them are going to be gentle along the way. There was a lot of criticism. There was a lot of misinformation, I believe, that was communicated during the election season. And there was probably some somewhat accurate information, but we didn't talk about the root causes. It's an insanely complicated arena. I don't think there are any simple answers. But if we incarcerate, and I understand we're back to the number one incarceration again because of some changes in Oklahoma, if I'm not mistaken. I saw that report a few weeks ago. If we're going to incarcerate 36,000 men and women every year, and we're going to release half of those every year, I think we ought to do a better job of preparing them for life on the outside. And that's why I'm such a fan of these specialty courts. That's why I'm a fan of meeting them at the gates. That's why I'm a fan of putting chapels in the prison system. We know that where the chapels are, and we've helped build those chapels at each of these systems around the state. We're working with these men and women's homes. I took your brother out to one in St. James Parish. He was moved. I took him to the rodeo. You may not know this about Eddie Rasponi. Nobody's asked me a question about that, but he's a personal friend of mine, as is Abraham. I took Eddie to an Extreme Ranch rodeo where we hosted a rodeo for a real live rodeo. Over 5,000 people showed up over a 4-day or 5-day period. I think on the night he was there, 2,000 or 3,000 were there. Real cowboys, real guys with tattoos were raising money to reach men with tattoos who were in the criminal justice system. And the pastor stopped in the middle of the rodeo, and I'd invite y'all to come witness it this year. I'll send Jim the details. I believe I invited you before. I invited John Bell to come out and to witness it. I told him we found the biggest, baddest bull in all of Texas, and we wanted him to ride it out in the opening ceremony, but he declined. And as Eddie watched this, tears came to his eyes because the pastor moved to the center of the aisle, and he asked the inmates who had been part of the criminal justice system, who had been through this men's home, how has this program affected you? And they told the story how they gotten off of drugs, they learned a skill, a paying skill, they earned money, they set money aside. Has it impacted anybody else in your family? Oh yeah, my wife is impacted. Is there anybody else? Yeah, my children. Tell them to come out on the arena. And all of a sudden you see a little 20-something bride and about 3 kids come out. He did this about 3 or 4 times. I looked over at Eddie and he had tears in his eyes. He said, that's what we need to do. That's what we need to do. You need to rehabilitate these men's hearts. When their hearts are reached, their decisions and their families are impacted. And that's what we're attempting to do with the evangelical approach. That's what the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary does. It tries to reach them from the inside. When there's a change on the inside, there's visible change on by the way, for those who've been through the program that New Orleans Baptist Theological puts through, the recidivism rate is not 50+% in 3 to 5 years like everywhere else. It's 17%. We have tangible evidence that it actually works. And I'm convinced it can continue to work. Jim, I guess my time's up. Very good. Thank you so much for the opportunity. God bless you and have a great 2020.